Chapter 2 Setup.exe Marble Streatham Headquarters, Manhattan, New York. White relaxed in the broad leather armchair by the window and deeply inhaled the scent of his tea, a high-quality jasmine picked in the mountains of Anhui Province, seemingly sent to soothe an old man's nerves on a stressful day. These oases of quiet, precious moments, spent alone with his tea and the view, his mind briefly freed from new troubles. These were the cornerstone of Martin White's effectiveness. Without them, he would have buckled years ago, replaced by a younger man with more zest. But the zen-like calm was all a carefully constructed front. White was a computer security lion, highly cultured and respected, but utterly without pity for those who crossed him. And on this bright blue Monday morning, his list of enemies had grown by at least one. Two, if he was forced by events to include Stillman. The security team was small and well-trained, but every organization had weak links. Stillman was a 4-year veteran of MSB's security division and could normally be relied upon. In truth, White wasn't sure whether to be more furious at the incomplete audit trail for the latest patch, or by the brazen way in which these amateur hackers had blundered into his system like a bull through a shop full of virtual china. Their hack couldn't have been more obvious, he mused, if it had painted itself neon pink and taken out a full-page ad in the New York Times. Initially, White wondered whether a competitor was playing games with them, blithely careening through his firewall just to show the old man how easy it was. But a few discreet inquiries had ruled out such a possibility, and his suspicions shifted to the usual raft of culprits: the greedy, the thrill-seeking, and the politically motivated. He tackled the problem methodically. No accounts were hacked, nor was there any attempt to do so. Therefore, White could rule out greed. The hack was so blockheaded and incompetent as to hardly test their antivirus systems, so it wasn't someone who wanted to run a risk just to get their jollies. After all, where was the fun in finding yourself promptly shot down like an amateur? No, this was something else. Someone with a grudge against the company. White would know more once the viral analysis was complete. All he was able to glean from the initial report, received at 6:30 a.m. on Saturday, mere hours after the hacking attempt, was that the payload was designed to gather and send information, not to delete or corrupt it. He sipped the tea and welcomed this latest infusion of clarity. His lofty perch, 46 floors above Manhattan, had always helped to empty his mind of the superfluous. A tourist helicopter passed perhaps a half-mile from the gleaming tower in which he sat, treating Gawkers to a view of that which success and diligence had created. It pleased him to imagine their jealousy of those who worked in and had helped to construct such titanic edifices to achievement. It was going to be a tough week, White felt sure, but at the end of it, he would have another scalp, and the world would learn that Marble Streatham was an impossibly tough nut to crack. There was a familiar knock. "Come in, Connie." "Good morning, sir," she said. Connie, who was White's long-standing personal assistant, wore her trademark short, tight leather skirt and a fetching red blouse. Instantly she knew that White approved and smiled inwardly. "I have Mr. Peterson outside. He's a few minutes early for your 10 o'clock. White had tried for 16 years to have Connie simply walk in rather than knocking and call him by his first name, but she had steadfastly refused. Theirs was a relationship which had spanned various categories since long before he had been appointed to Marble Streatham, but she treated him with the same respect and deference she'd shown on her first day all those years ago. "Thanks. Would you like some tea? Now, what's your opinion on something?" Conchita Vasquez took the chair opposite and poured her own tea, though White was happy to do it for her. "I read the report on the Saturday morning hacking attempt," she told him. Are we certain they achieved nothing? Absolutely, White said quickly. There were no unauthorized data packets sent out, and our AV software caught the worm really very quickly, he said with a hint of pride. But I want to know who was responsible. And, he said, setting down his cup, mostly, I want to know why. Connie tried the tea. She preferred something darker, richer, and stronger, but she indulged her boss in this and many other matters. We are a strong and successful company. There are reasons for hatred right there. Not justifications, but reasons. White stood and paced for a couple of minutes while working the problem through in his mind. Hate, he began, is such a poor motivator. A blind beast, flailing in the dark. Connie sat quietly while her boss expostulated, as was their habit. It seeks only destruction, does it not? But this worm was more subtle, was something more elegant. We're not talking about a Schubert impromptu or the Kirov ballet, Connie told him. These are kids sitting in their underwear writing code in some tower block in Taiwan, not artists. Smiling at the color which Connie chose to add to their speculation, White pressed on. They wanted something, not just to take down the system or to cost us money. They wanted information. We're a company with secrets. Connie set down her tea and crossed her legs. Secrets are valuable. But they couldn't have hoped to access private emails or internal documents, White assured her. The worm wasn't sophisticated enough. Perhaps, he guessed after a long moment of thought, they planned this to be a distraction. Perhaps the real hack is still to come. This was dismissed with a shake of the head. I think we're making too much of a dumb experiment by people who should have known better, Connie told him. Right now they're just thanking their lucky stars that they left no identifiable traces. They'd better not be idiotic enough to use that same worm again somewhere else, or the FBI will hang them out to dry. White's lips curled in distaste. Must we inform the feds once more? We must, Connie replied, if you'd like them to have a chance of catching these little creeps. Otherwise we're leaving ourselves open. She could see that her boss was far from convinced. She knew that he regarded the FBI as a ham-fisted, amateurish organization, not nearly as refined or educated as his own in-house people. But even the small group of contractors who performed the occasional special task for White could, he knew, struggle to find people who were sufficiently adamant about their anonymity. The FBI paperwork alone, he complained. Connie snorted. It's not as though you have to complete it. Besides, if they survived one hack, they might decide to try again with a better worm. White returned to his seat and poured more tea. If they're such knuckleheads, why should we worry? Well, say they try their hands at metamorphic code next time, or come up with a more destructive payload, Connie warned. Or find their way into some places we'd rather they didn't. They both knew that MSB had plenty of skeletons in the cupboard, some of them sufficient to attract the attention of the Securities and Exchange Commission, among others. Prevention rather than cure, isn't that what you're always telling me? White took a moment to admire her figure before answering. It was a gesture entirely unhidden, and one which Connie minded not at all. Very well. Send the file to those blockheads and see what they come up with. Yes, sir. And send Stillman up here, he added as Connie rose to leave. She turned at the door. I suppose you're going to fire him? Connie, my dear, he pleaded. I can't believe you take the rumors seriously. She smiled a patient smile. Which rumors would those be, sir? He pressed a hand to his chest. That beneath the suit jacket of every senior bank executive there beats the heart of a merciless devil. She gave him one more moment to trace her leather-clad thighs with his gaze. Merciless? Of course not, she said. Devil? Connie grinned. Absolutely. Office of the Daily Gerbil, Newton, Massachusetts. Cal Bergstrom sighed. In times of stress or depression, Cal liked to mutter animatedly to himself. He felt that it vented his troubles, whereas in truth, it likely exacerbated them. "If I have to read another word about the fucking singularity," he grumbled, "that impending saintly union of man and machine, I might just hire the Terminator to go back in time and murder Ralph's parents." He tidied his unruly black hair with two hands and read the email again, hoping that its tone, hopeful, nagging, testy, might have changed. "Ralph," he said, "I'm a simple man with simple needs. Just give me what I ask for." Cal sighed so deeply that his elbow slipped from the chair's armrest, and for a moment he risked ending up on the floor underneath his desk. How fitting, reduced to a gibbering pile by the stark recalcitrance of those who depend on me for their livelihood. He decided to answer later, though the email had been sitting in his inbox since the previous evening. Ralph was due to make an appearance this morning, and could be formally rebuffed, yet again, in person. "And let's make this the last time, shall we, Ralph?" Cal continued, his nasal voice the only sound in the deserted office. Belinda would be in next, he guessed. If Cal had the time to consider it, he would have been struck by just how dependent he had become on that one individual. 28, Chinese-American, and exceptionally smart, Belinda had proved to have shoulders broad enough for the stresses of a startup tech blog, despite her almost impossibly slender frame. It was a time of change and pressure, uncertainty and sudden shifts of direction, and she weathered every storm in a way which truly impressed Cal and everyone else at the gerbil. Instead, Cal answered 3 emails from potential advertisers, finding that his negotiating technique had become something closer to begging. His main angle was to laud the recent improvement in their stats, which showed that visitors generally clicked on at least one article other than the one they originally landed on. Still, the gerbil wasn't building the kind of dependable, week-in, week-out traffic which showed them that they had a base. It was just this consistent clientele which would command better advertising rates and save the gerbil from tumbling headlong down the road to clickbait purgatory. Cal understood this as well as anyone, and he hated the reality. The problem was that he still lacked a workable plan to avoid it. Of this, he and the whole team, it seemed, were painfully aware. There is no one in the world more paranoid and cynical than a freelancer who is also an at-will employee. Without a supportive, reassuring contract, without benefits or even the guarantee of a regular salary, Cal knew that his hard-won assembly of technology writers was close to fragmenting. They would simply choose to do something else for a living, depriving him of their talents. Or, just as bad, they would take other, more dependable work via any of the huge range of online freelancing systems which were making such ungodly money these days. In either event, he'd swiftly become a content provider who was unable to provide content. Even that which he felt able to offer was quickly becoming demeaning to everyone involved. The blessed humidifiers article was the latest case in point. It was embarrassing even to ask him for it, but Cal Bergstrom could read the writing on the wall. "Good morning," Ralph offered from the doorway to Cal's office. "Is now a good time?" "Sure." Cal took off his reading glasses and waved Ralph to the only other seat in the cramped office. On 3 sides of the room, struggling shelves boomed with paperbacks, journals, and offprints, separated only by a range of lush houseplants, rambling green philodendron, whose needs amid the cuttingly dry air of Boston were considerable. Orphans from Cal's divorce, they all knew. "So, humidifiers." It was a statement of fact, but also of distaste. "It's what's on the menu, Ralph. We all have to eat our greens, right?" Cal's angular features were softened by inquiring hazel eyes. "We do, I guess." Ralph responded. His posture suggested a fatalistic shrug without actually delivering one. He came across as depressed and dissatisfied, someone for whom the daily grind simply wasn't done. Listen, Ralph, we don't have to pretend that this is what you were born to do. Cal stumbled through a prepared speech, some of which had been cribbed from a couple of management textbooks. It's only for a while. Cal stopped in mid-flow. Cal reflexively put his glasses back on as if to defend himself. I know, he said tiredly. We all know, buddy, Ralph said. Question is, what do we do about it? They had been colleagues for long enough that Ralph felt sure he wasn't being overly familiar, but the blurring of their hierarchy triggered Cal's instinct to recoil into his shell like a startled turtle. I've been emailing with advertisers only this morning, Cal assured him. Our numbers last month were good. Ralph knew when the truth was being stretched, but he let it go. And what'll really put us over the top are 1,000 words on humidifiers? Cal pinched the bridge of his nose. There are consumers out there who need that advice, Ralph. They'll Google it, and I'll make damn sure we're right there above the fold. And once they're in, look at these numbers, he said, turning a printed spreadsheet to face Ralph. The curve on click-throughs is better than it's ever been. They like our environment and they like our content. We just need to keep it going for a few more months, and then we'll grab some of the larger contracts, and then, well, who knows? It wasn't that Ralph didn't think it was possible. He just didn't really want to be a part of it. It meant spending his working day producing soul-sapping literature which was designed chiefly to be readable, whatever the hell that meant. The journalistic version of baby formula, guaranteed not to upset a tiny stomach. Okay, Ralph said simply. Humidifiers it is, but I really do think we should talk some more about my ideas on the singularity, Cal interrupted, investing the title with grandeur. You're persistent, I'll give you that. Which they both knew was how the textbook for new managers advised that one described a royal pain in the ass. I can't promise anything. Sure, but stick with the program, and when the time comes, I'll make sure you're center stage. Bullshit. Thanks, Cal. Expect something in your inbox by the end of the day tomorrow. Ralph went to find coffee before sliding into the tiny window ledge which served as his workstation. The premises weren't exactly ideal, but at least they were cheap, and being directly above the Café Malay did give them a convenient lunch option. The place looked exactly like it truly was, an old student apartment which had been inexpensively knocked into shape until it provided a tiny reception area, an office for Cal, and an open plan area with space for around 6 people. 3 of them were in, 2 very clearly nursing hangovers. The third was Belinda Wong. Hey, Ralph, I wondered if I could ask your advice on something? Ralph courteously poured her a cup of something dark and obscenely caffeinated. Sure. How are you, by the way? Oh, fine, she said brightly. But I'm finding the air in my apartment way too dry. Do you know anything about, what are they called now? She pondered, clicking her fingers. Very funny, Lindy, and when my modest little effort wins the Soul Suckers Pulitzer, you'll be singing a different tune. He waved her away, and she headed to Cal's office, bundle of documents in hand, chuckling to herself. Good, Ralph found himself thinking. He needs to hear you laugh like he needs to breathe in and out. He was caught between wishing some kind of failure upon the preppy little egghead and willing him to pull off a modern miracle, finding that balance between allure and depth in an era when you had only a fraction of a second to entice your client. As Robert Redford said of his espionage operation in Spy Game, we needed twice the sex with half the foreplay. Entrepreneurs in Cal's position need 16 times as much after barely a wink across a crowded room. Ralph pushed away the thought, turned off his phone, and sat down to write. The sole purpose of coming here, he was reminded each time, was to work uninterrupted. This was the golden unicorn of modern times. After all, Ralph had, like many people his age and younger, spent 20 years honing his distractibility until he could find himself diving down 3 different avenues at once, each of them quite unrelated to the task at hand. When working at home, if he forgot to switch on his productivity apps, he'd often come to his senses an hour later with 16 Wikipedia tabs open and in the midst of a game of online chess with his work no closer to completion. Worse still, his research into the fascinating world of humidifiers relied almost exclusively on the internet. It was like sitting a hungry child down in a free candy store and telling him not to move until you got back. The presence of others helped, along with the sense that, when goofing off, he was stealing time and money from a struggling enterprise which needed his best work, and quickly. He straightened his back and resolved to stop procrastinating and, in the words of every beleaguered journalist ever, just write the damn thing. Is it dry in here? If your skin is suffering and your allergies are rocketing, the chances are your home needs a quick injection of moisture. Oh, God. FBI, Counterterrorism Unit, Washington, D.C. Andy Valchek frowned as he ran the tip of a pen down his hard copy schedule for the day. God damn it, don't tell me we're in there again. Meeting room 3 was his idea of hell on earth, a windowless, stuffy prison where he was obliged to listen to others drone on, seemingly interminably, about matters he couldn't give 2 shits about. Most of them outranked him, and his attendance was always described as compulsory, despite his barely ever saying a word. It was not even remotely the dramatic and satisfying police work he'd signed up for. But there was a tonic for what ailed him. He just needed to remember to chew mints or gum afterwards, so it wouldn't be obvious. Valchek headed to the men's room, and sitting innocently in his stall, took 3 large slugs of Jim Beam, one after another. It stung his throat. It was only 9:45 after all, but he welcomed the almost instantaneous buzz. As he sat for the few moments required to avoid suspicions, he began to enjoy the warm, companionable sensations which were becoming so familiar now that he wondered how this uneventful dulledry had ever been possible without it. He chewed down half a pack of Mentos before leaving the stall, washed his hands and splashed his face with cold water to regain a semblance of focused professionalism, and smiled to himself as he left the men's room, his secret known only to him. It had been 8 months since he began bringing his flask to work, and so far no one seemed any the wiser. Morning briefings for the cyberterrorism team had been pushed to 10 o'clock at the request of almost everyone. Inundated with daily emails, the 16 men and women desperately needed preparation time, and the meetings ran better and, most importantly, more quickly as a result. Most days, they were out by 10:45. Today's was going well, Valchek observed. There was, in fact, only a single new thread on the board. We're calling it Bankworm Delta 6, Joe Marsh told his colleagues. Our good friend Martin White at Marble Streatham called this one in yesterday afternoon. There was a murmur of recognition, but not of respect. White's opinions on FBI agents were well known. Must have near killed him to ask us for help, Valchek observed. It was the first thing he'd said in 20 minutes. Well, he's concerned for the security of banking systems in general, according to him, Marsh said. This one's a little trashy, not very artistic in its execution, but I want to volunteer to play with it in the sandbox. Who's up? Marsh checked the availability roster in his folder. Agent Valchek, Merry Christmas. Shit. Delta 6 is all yours. Tell me what, why, and if at all possible, who. Copy that? Roger Dodger, Valchek replied with faked enthusiasm. On the one hand, this meant the urgent need for coffee and sobriety, something which Valchek raced to accomplish immediately after the meeting finished. There was nothing like sloppy work to inadvertently reveal the vices of a man who drank when he shouldn't. On the other hand, it did at least mean a day away from updating procedures and reading reports which, while readily achievable while half-buzzed, lacked the appeal of the chance to work with a real live piece of software. A brand new one, at that. Valchek returned to his own desk, a cluttered but not entirely unprofessional collection of documents, disks, and coffee cups, and booted up the software. The sandbox was a virtual environment which could be engineered to mock up almost any type of system. In the past, he'd trialed viruses written by college geeks who wanted to change the test scores on the administrator's computers and a blundering piece of crap thrown together by a drug cartel. Delta 6 was superior, but still hadn't accomplished its objective. What does that tell me? Like any virus, Delta 6 contained a payload module, which in this case seemed to be a set of instructions for locating sensitive information on the bank's mainframe, the kind of details firewalls were built to protect. At the tip, as Valchek thought of it, was an encryption module, which ensured that the code would transform itself quickly as it spread through the bank's system, leaving no telltale trace for the resident antivirus system to track. However, the AV suite at Marble Streatham was written by zealous, virus-seeking ninjas for whom a simple encrypt-decrypt module was child's play. One of the very earliest copying attempts was spotted, and the virus found itself abruptly quarantined before it could deploy its payload into the more sensitive parts of the mainframe. Not bad, compadre, but no cigar. Valchek searched in the lines of code for familiar patterns, specifically signs of the virus's origin. The encryptor looked to be a variant of an off-the-shelf module, probably downloaded from the dark net. It had a certain elegance to it, a clarity of purpose. There was little wasted code, demonstrating at the very least that this hacker carried out his work with pride. This ruled out angry teens or Occupy-type heathens, the likes of which Valchek had confronted before, and who he held in the lowest possible regard. No, this was an aspiring artist, someone with a point to make and the means to give the security system of one of the world's most secretive private banks a run for their money. It was well written and beautifully organized. It just hadn't worked on this occasion, probably because the bank had closed the vulnerability faster than expected. But still, Valchek found himself almost impressed. He picked up the phone. Agent Marsh? Yeah. I finished the sandbox analysis. Well, I'll send something over in a few hours, but this isn't just your average smart, pissed-off hippie with a laptop. I think we got a new player in town. Sichuan Palace, Brooklyn, Massachusetts. You know, Ralph began against the soft soundtrack of the Butterfly Lovers Concerto, if I eat any more of this, I might just turn into a chili pepper. Their nearly anniversary dinner has extended late enough that they were the only diners left in their half of the restaurant, a well-respected 30-table place in the heart of Brookline Village. A spread of their favorite dishes lay largely empty, scant leftovers the only clues. Thin strips of pork and celery, a ferociously fiery bow of ox meat and tripe, and the remnants of a deep-fried whole fish. The rice was largely untouched, leaving more room for crisp, cold Qingdao lager. Yeah, I'm done. Patting her stomach, Kim experienced that unique form of fullness which only came from spicy, delicious food. Neuroreceptors were registering happiness on a number of levels, although she was slightly troubled by how quiet Ralph had been all evening. Want to waddle out of here? Ralph asked, trying to make eye contact with one of the remaining servers. In a minute. I'm not sure I could walk right now. Kim pushed back her chair and adopted an only slightly exaggerated posture, slumping slightly and puffing out her cheeks. Besides, you haven't told me what's bothering you. Surprised, Ralph looked up. Who says anything's? It's Cal, isn't it? The gerbil. Tell me, Ralph. Get it off your chest. He paused to give the waiter his card and then sighed. Yeah, I guess. And a few other things. That doesn't sound good. She brought herself upright and took his hand. Tell Auntie Kim. He was shy now, either unable to put these worries into words or unwilling to burden Kim with them. She saw it and hoped it was merely the former. It was important to her that he felt comfortable, that he could open up. 2 years together was a significant milestone for them both. Neither were known for their ability to keep relationships intact, and Kim had been feeling more and more recently like this smart, cute writer might be the one. It's kinda everything, Ralph said. The confusion and hurt on Kim's face instantly made him regret it. Not us, he hurriedly added. Work, writing, articles I don't care about, and the rent and... He felt Kim squeeze his hand. My mother always used to say, she began, a familiar trope which invariably precluded considerable wisdom. Don't try to tend the fire while also pouring the soup. The smile felt good. That's nice. I'm going to remember that one. I guess she means one thing at once. Kim nodded. Do you want to get a different job? Something where you don't have a boss? It's tempting, Ralph admitted. Cal's doing his best, but... He can be an asshole, she said suddenly. Ralph stared at her, then lifted Kim's empty bottle of Qingtao. That's enough booze for you, young lady. I can swear if I want to, she protested a little tipsily. Sure, it's just you've only ever said 3 bad words in the whole time I've known you. Kim took a deep breath as if to unleash a torrent of expletives, but Ralph covered her mouth with a hand. Take it easy. Once the giggling subsided, Ralph found that, as usual, she had sage advice. Look around at the other websites and see what you can find. Send them your best stuff. Just doing that much will make you feel a bit better. Good idea, Ralph said. And keep working on the singular thing, she added. Someone will want it one day. Singularity, Ralph smiled. And I will. Unusually emboldened by the beers, Kim had another suggestion. And as for being generally happier, well, there's always sex. Ralph nearly spat the remains of his tea across the table. Let's wait until we get home, okay? He said, napkin to his mouth. Or you could just ask me to marry you. He spoke without thinking yet again. Okay, definitely no more drinking for you. The waiter reached the table just in time to hear this awkward exchange, noticed Kim's rising anger, and backed away as quickly as he could. Ralph was so shocked and appalled by the furious look she gave him that he was rooted to the spot. She was out the door and 10 yards down the street before he could even catch up. Jesus, Kim, stop. He took her arm. What's so funny, huh? You don't want to be married to a poor painter? Is that it? What? Ralph quickly zipped up his jacket in the sub-zero temperature. Or would your folks not like an Asian girl in the family? Okay, you're talking crazy now. Ralph had his hands out as if to wave down a speeding freight train. Am I? She glowered. 2 years, Ralph, and I still haven't met any of your family. It's not as though they're on the other side of the world. I'm sorry, it's just... Just? She prompted angrily, hands aloft. He'd scarcely seen her lose her temper like this, and it deeply unnerved him. It's not you, it's them. What? She snorted. You think I'll take them for small-minded podunk people and think less of you? A shrug was his reply. In retrospect, it was yet another poor choice. My parents lived through years of war, she seethed, in a hole by a road covered with tourmaline. You think I'd be prejudiced because of... Hand on heart, his face a picture of contrition, Ralph began to make it right. I'm sorry. I love you and I think you're awesome. You'll meet my folks this Thanksgiving, whatever happens, I promise. And we'll talk about the future very soon, work everything out. Frowning, one foot angling from side to side, Kim decided to take him at his word. Okay? A promise is a promise, though. Yes, it is. Let's get a cab. It's freezing out here. You've just been too mad to notice. The cab was warm and welcome. Kim had already passed through the angry stage and forgiven Ralph with teary backseat assurances before nodding off on his shoulder as the cab turned onto their street. He negotiated her upstairs, complaining in that terribly cute, almost childish way of hers when she was overly tired, and put her to bed. A big glass of water and 2 Advil lay ready on the nightstand. But Ralph made coffee and took out a legal pad. Things to do. Career was the new title. He thought back over the conversation, Googled a couple of things, and then began to write.